things, or did he ask you questions?
Pretty. I mean, he ended up doing pretty much a broad review of everything by the time it was done. But he kind of said, what are your basic questions? But by the time he was done, really, he pretty much ended up almost going over everything. But it was really helpful, in my opinion, having the video, because just listening to an hour of audio without falling asleep is, you know, it's nice to have a face and a smile.
Sure. A face and a smile. Hi.
And I suppose if you want this video then to just post for future,
I don't know. Let's see.
Okay.
Fair
enough.
I said we've asked for a review, and I am happy to do that. I also have not prepared a lot simply because I don't have the time to do that. But I am going to direct you to 2 resources that I think are helpful, and I think we may use one of them to do our kind of walk through history. My computer ran out of battery, and so it is slow to revive. So, what overall questions? I said to Dawn downstairs today while we were talking about something else. I said my main goal today is to maybe talk you down from the cliff just a little bit to say what we try to accomplish in the comprehensive exams is for you to synthesize all of this and to make some meaning in terms of what you do in your classroom. I mean, that's the it. If we came here just to learn about the history of music education in the United States, while that might be interesting for some of us, it isn't really an applicable use of that information. But let's start by maybe thinking of something, since you have taken that class, maybe something that was an aha. That's gross. That's why I don't know if I want that posted online. So sorry. That I want you to think about something in your teaching, or something in the profession that you've questioned because of something that you learned or read in the history and philosophy class. Maybe something you've questioned or something that you read that maybe had an impact on teaching, or you'd like to see it different in the profession. Does that make sense?
Okay, I can offer, well, not quite what you're asking, but something that I've applied to life since, because I work with a theater also. And many of my theater friends were irritated that you can't find a public school in Nebraska that doesn't have a music teacher. There is at least somebody, whether it's elementary or high school, but somewhere there's a certified music teacher on staff. But you can find many, in fact, more than not, you will find a high school that doesn't have a certified drama instructor or art instructor. And this person was saying to me, why? Why do we always have music teachers? We don't have a theater teacher. And then I was able to explain, well, we've been working at this for like 200 years. And that was a perspective, knowing that it started back with Lowell Mason, and it's been an almost 200-year push to make sure that it continues. I said, I guess what that means is theater's got to get organized, and there's no better time to start than now, and that's the only way it's going to affect the future.
That's a great answer, and actually that was completely an answer. That we have to be organized in order to be successful at advocating for certified teachers to be in the plan. Hey!
Sorry, Lauren.
Are the babies
we
there?
were struggling.
Did you just block the camera, though?
Did I? Yeah. Oh, whoops, wrong side of the iPad. There we go.
Hey, baby distractions. Hello.
Dr. Fuelberth doesn't have to make us see the picture.
I love it. Oh, I'm getting very rewarded by smiling right now. Yeah, awesome.
I'm going to mute us so we're not distracting.
Oh, okay.
But I'll chime in if I need anything.
Yeah,
Otherwise, I'm just going to enjoy.
Hard to distract me. Good. Okay, so we know we have to be organized, and we know that we have to be advocates for our art. We may take that for granted from time to time until we'll see a major cut happen in a district where we work, or where we can at least see it happening over here, right? And we know that organization started in started in some different ways. So first of all, we didn't have the Music Educators National Conference. We had what?
The first one was the...
Music supervisor?
Yes,
This is not your comprehensive exam, but
Yeah.
we'll ask a few questions, and then I'll help out too.
Well, do you want us to go
So-
all the way back to the
Nope.
first time that they met?
What was it originally called?
Well, originally we were under NEA,
Very good.
National Education Association.
Yep.
Yeah.
But then because of the earthquake in California, there was a
NEA
guy
didn't-
in Iowa, in Keokuk, Iowa, who said, hey, I have this great rhythm thing that I'm doing and I want you to come check it out. So he sent out some kind of formal invitations to people in the Midwest and said, hey, come for just a short time. And that was the very first time that music educators met for the first time together. And then,
Just them.
yeah, just them, separate from all the other disciplines.
Right. And so when they first formed into something that was music specific, what did they eventually call themselves?
Music Supervisors National
Yeah.
Conference.
Why is that? Why is that of any significance?
Because the supervisors of the other teachers in the district. So it might have been like one person that kind of, okay, all of you have to teach music, and so I'll kind of oversee everybody and kind of help you out with what you're doing, kind of a music teacher of the general teachers.
Yeah. So who was delivering the music instruction then? You're like,
Other
we
music
were coming here
teachers.
for the review, and now you're asking us all the questions. So who was doing the teaching?
Actual
The music
Classroom
supervisors, right?
They were teaching the teachers.
Yeah,
And who was doing the music instruction in schools?
the regular classroom teacher.
The general classroom teacher. And how was it supposed to be integrated? Was it supposed to be integrated once a week for 20 minutes or?
No, all the time.
All the
day,
time.
every day.
So we had non-specialists, right, delivering music instruction, but it was happening a lot. It was happening more often. It was a part of the life of the school, a part of the school day. So I think that's a really important thing to remember. When I first taught in Omaha Public Schools, they really emphasized that as something that they hoped to happen. That it was actually the general classroom teacher that you may only see them twice a week. At the time, that seemed like not enough, but twice a week now for many of us seems like a lot of time. You may only see them twice a week, but the classroom teacher really should be carrying this through the week. And I remember having 2 fifth grade classrooms in portable. They were in the portable unit, so I had my music on a cart, and I went to teacher number 1, and she fled the area, as fast as possible, right? And the other teacher stayed there each and every time, which was amazing to me. And then she would follow through. She asked me at the end every time. She would say, "Now, what would you like us to work on this week?" And I remember thinking, "Oh, this is how this is played out." But it wasn't the case in the other room. Guess who, seemed to make some progress a little bit faster. I mean, and it was a part of their day. And so I at the time I didn't really think too much of that. I mainly thought, okay, this teacher checks out, and this is just, really interesting. But how much faster that musical development happened was incredible. So I like having that little example of what that might have been like to have the specialist in the area. But then we have more contact time with students when there are general teachers. What's the downside of that?
It's less kids.
They're not specialized. I mean, they don't have the technical skills, the knowledge the specialized knowledge that we have as specialist teachers.
Couldn't you technically say they weren't being taught by highly qualified teachers?
Absolutely. That's a wonderful carryover into today, right? They're not being taught by highly qualified teachers. And so there was a complaint about that. The teacher that I mentioned actually had quite a bit of musical background, and so that worked really beautifully. But otherwise, that was the complaint, that there isn't enough specialization. You really don't know what you're doing. So we're going to try to make it so that there is a music teacher teaching music all the time. That specialization was great, but it also had some drawbacks and continues to have some drawbacks, right? We only have so much time in the day. There are only so many of us. We don't have the luxury of having the same amount of contact time with students that we did. And the specialization also kind of changed a little bit with how we started doing things in secondary schools especially. Because the more specialized the teacher, the more specialized that curriculum became. And so in secondary schools, we would see more ensemble music making, which has continued to be our model to this day. The most frequent way that we see secondary music instruction happening is in an ensemble model. And with that specialization came higher and higher expectations for the musical product, right? Higher and higher expectations, which really has formed so much of the practice that we have in terms of that movement towards specialization. The more specialized we become, if you kind of think of schools like this, the more specialized the study, how many people are here? Fewer, right? And so that actually has made it so that we aren't across the entire curriculum. We are for a smaller group of students in most schools because we've kind of shrunk due to that specialization in some ways. So the main thing that I want you to think about, don't get too tied up in the chronology and the dates. Except there are some that are important. We may ask you, but it's not going to be a make or break. I think what's make or break is, are you able to kind of translate some of this into what you're doing? And that's the point of the comprehensive exam. Not really to punish and to make it miserable for everyone. It really isn't that. It's supposed to be a scholarly conversation that kind of puts the last little decorations on this experience. If you think about any other...
Actually, kind of piggybacks off of what you were just talking about, the specialization and about the setup that we have, especially at secondary levels, being ensemble-based. And I know that started in singing schools, and it started, from the very beginning, we've carried this model with us throughout the whole time. But then we were looking at our curriculum class, and yes, I'm making random tie-overs, to the new...
The random tie-overs is actually the very purpose of the...
See, there you go.
The
new curriculum standards that are coming out. And the fact that everyone's wanting or starting to want to come away from just, like you're saying, the product being the thing and the process being the thing instead. And what has always stuck in my mind on that is it always seems to have been based on what was the most popular or the most prolific job in music after you got out of education. And that's what the 21st century needs was trying to do originally when we all started. There were choirs in church, there were choirs, symphonies all over, there were orchestras all over, there was marching band, there's all these things that people went into after that they got world acclaim and they got money, and it was an actual career path. And as the specialization has kept going, we've had less and less people going into symphonies or going into orchestras just because they're not popular anymore.
Mm-hmm. Or our access to them in other forms is much greater.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to
go to the physical
it's not
place
the
anymore.
same experience, but you don't have to go to live performance all the time.
Right. So finding a way to adjust. Yeah. Finding a way to
in my
adjust
jammies,
to
in
the
my
future.
recliner, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. But that's if you look at that and carryovers to our culture, it's why the home theater has become the that's why we have the home theater seating, right? Because we know that we can bring this right to our house and make it almost the same as going to the movie theater. I mean, that's kind of the carryover into popular culture, right? That we can bring a lot of these things right to our home. Maybe not the same things, but the parts of it that we want.
Right.
Parts of it that we want, not necessarily the parts that are the best for us.
Right.
We're not necessarily watching on that 60-inch HD TV documentaries about whatever, could actually help us understand more about the world or be better informed or make us more well-rounded human beings. Okay. Good. There were two resources online. The Concise History of American Music Education that's down in the library, that's great. It's kind of like the Reader's Digest version of the Michael Mark that we read, and hits on some big items, and actually is a pretty quick read, but there are a few things that are missing. I mean, there are a few holes or things that are not quite as explored as well. In the class, and I'm not sure if Dr. Richmond had this in there, but at the 150th anniversary, and I put this in the class, I'm going to send it to you as a link again. There was this kind of history in pictures, 150 years. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, Brett had saved it and then it sent it out because the link was from our class was broken. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, because I went to the history and philosophy and clicked on it because it was under our documents, and that link didn't work. But Brett had saved it last summer, and so he just emailed it out.
Yeah, I was just there. I thought actually we might just walk through that a little bit, but as a point of departure, because there are so many things. There are so many things that are not. They're not as memorable, or they didn't have as much of an impact, but then some of our big items do. One of the things that I usually ask if we're thinking about ensemble music, how, there's the question, trace the beginnings of music education in the United States. If we think about how general music practices kind of began, and singing, and how choral music began in the United States, and then how instrumental music, both in terms of band and orchestra, how did what kinds of institutions were essential to those styles of music, or those types of ensembles for coming into the United States? Where did we get them?
Church.
Okay, so singing was really bad. Singing in church really was terrible, right? Stank up the place. Be sure to put that. That's why we're going to put that on. I mean, it was just bad. And so, if this is going to be a part of our culture, a part of our everyday, we want that to be better. And so, these singing schools cropped up as a way to actually make singing in churches a little bit better. What do we still carry over as kind of emblems of that influence of the church in choral music? Choir robes, excellent.
We still sing church liturgy in public schools, even though it's argued over frequently.
Yeah. And what's our justification for doing that?
And
it makes
also
up
the quality of teaching within the music itself.
There's a big chunk of time where the only music that was written down was sacred music.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't write, people didn't write down music, they didn't have the words, they didn't have the means of writing it down unless you were working for a church. Mm-hmm. And so if we get rid of sacred music, well, then there goes
an entire time period.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
Culturally, that's how people live.
Yeah.
If we're talking about significance, that's...
People still live.
It's
a part of human existence, right? Faith practice is a part of human experience, or faith practice in whatever form it takes is a part of human experience. And so if we are helping students gather meaning in their lives, then we will explore that as a dimension of our humanity. Good. How about pick one? Should we pick orchestra? How do we get orchestras?
Well, orchestras actually weren't in schools to start with. I mean, the first high school orchestra was like early 1900s because it was bands. And then they slowly started integrating, but they all came in at the high school level, and they were actually outside the school day. And it was for kids who were already taking private lessons, and those kids who already knew how to play would come and be a part of the orchestra. But the challenge was that they were playing professional level literature. There was no actual literature written for students who were learning. I mean, it was just, kids learning their scales, arpeggios, basic method books, and then it's just like diving right into, here's your heavy literature. And so...
Who were the teachers?
one that is on our list.
Weren't kids being apprenticed by professional orchestra musicians? Like they have somebody in the community that played the violin, and so everybody would go learn violin, and then we'd have a whole school of violins.
Most often people who immigrated to the United States, right, who were professional musicians in orchestras. And so what do we have a tendency to do? We teach like we were taught. And the repertoire that was chosen was often the great orchestral literature. Maybe it was rewritten to some degree, but that was the literature that was used in schools.
Will Earhart, is that the name you're looking for?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not looking for a name. I'm trying to get you beyond some names today.
You said who, and so
I mean who kind of generally. What is the profile of the teacher? But yeah, you're right. So what is the profile of that teacher? Mm-hmm. Most of the time, professional orchestra musicians.
The fact that orchestras were around was it was a tradition thing then. Mm-hmm. So it was a cultural tradition.
Right.
It was a popular tradition to go watch.
Popular tradition to go watch, and the meat and potatoes of the orchestra program was that great literature of the European orchestras of the time. If we were to kind of look at this is a very generalized view of that because there are different practices in orchestras across the United States. If we were to say band, choir, orchestra, who tends to hold on to music of the masters the most? Which of those three, what might we say? It still carries through with us today. That still carries through with us today. And that follows into our practice. Okay, so I'm trying to help draw these threads into why did that matter? That's how that came into the United States. What about band? What carries over into band?
Military, and John Philip Sousa was the biggest lead-in for band into schools. He would, all the stuff that he wrote for band, he'd take his band with him from city to city to city and just show them off, and then all of a sudden everybody says, well, that's really cool, I want my kid to play trumpet. Somebody teach my kid to play trumpet. And they're all traveling, so they didn't really have anybody directly there. They almost had to, Sousa, if I remember right, actually helped train some of the supervisors that were around to do band as well, and started kind of leaving.
Stay for a while,
get
this set up, and then we'll go somewhere else. Mainly because we have attention spans that last how long, right? We'll get this set up in the community, now they're self-maintaining, and now there isn't as much of a need for me, so I will move on to the next place. But the role of the band was in the entertainment, in the social life of people who didn't have Nintendo, right? It was a very different thing. You didn't just sit, if you sat in your house, you might sit in your house, but you're looking at your family members, right? Where we have people today. I have two of them in my house that I have to rip them away, right? Rip them away from other sources of entertainment. It's just not. It wasn't the motivation to, let's go hear the community band in the band shell tonight. All right, it's a different kind of time, but that still carries through. So what the things that we get, the signs or the emblems or the elements of that we still have with bands, marches at her center, what else? Uniforms, ranks, leadership structure, marching itself. Right? We have a number of those in marching band. Of course, concert band ends up being influenced by both of these worlds, right? And wind ensemble, yet something different. So if we kind of look at if we trace those beginnings, you can get caught up in the detail of that, but if we trace the beginnings, those are the things that carry over into what we commonly do today, how we lead instruction in some of those environments. We may have more of an apprentice model in orchestra where I'm going to play and then you're going to play and then we're going to learn from that master-student relationship, which we may have, but we don't think about that as often in a choral program, right? We're all doing this at the same time. we might hope for that, but those influences are different. We have, kind of the leadership structure in the marching band where we have someone who's leading everything, but then you're in charge of this group or this rank, right? We even carry through our practice in that way. So that's kind of the model of what I think we hope would come out of how do you bring these things together. What would be helpful is to go, I think because the pictures are engaging, go through that. Do you all have a link to that now? I had it bookmarked and ready to go, and then
we emailed each other the link.
This one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just downloaded it.
It's also one, it was written in 1996, but I'm going to send it to you anyway because while both there are editions of these texts, it's a kind of Reamer Elliott. There are several of those contrasting both contributions. What I like about this particular article is it goes through some of these major questions. Do we want to do anything else with history? What I was going to recommend to you is with that 150 years, see if you can just go glance through that. Don't get too caught up in reading, but they're captions. It's a little like a cartoon. Think about it as a comic book, okay? And so you go through and see if you can kind of identify the big moments. And of course it stops it's been a while since this was written. So you're going to need some things after that from your text. But Lauren, does that seem familiar to you? Do you remember what that was? Or I can put that out there as a link in the Blackboard site. Just a link to JSTOR. It doesn't take us much past, but that's the one thing about history is while someone's account of history, and we're remembering that this is a history, the textbook, whichever one it was that you read, I think you read the Michael Mark. It's a history. It's one person's representation of what happened. I can send both of those things out to you. But I think if you are bogged down in looking at a lot of print, I think that can take you through and see if you can highlight things that you find of greatest significance. And then think about some of the people. It's not who were some of the great contributors, and why do we remember them today? If I think about Francis Elliott Clark, who is one of my favorite characters in music education. Technology brought into our classrooms, right? Because of this, and also music appreciation. See here, good to go. Why is that important for us? Well, we shouldn't just be necessarily performing. We should be learning about and helping to put things in a context, right? The 10-minute talk, it was a big deal. The start of every music class. Not that I agree that it should be at the start of every music class. Bueller. But I mean, that there was listening and guided listening. And I think of my dad will tell stories about that. And I love it when he talks about those things, or how he, was in school and how the whole school basically was in one of the a cappella choirs that was in place, really at the height of the a cappella movement. But he would talk about in the elementary school, how the country school where they got the Victrola, they got the record player, and he talks with great love, with great love and adoration about the music teacher and how they listened to music, and how then he would, when they got their first radio at home, he would come home and try to tune into the Mormon Tabernacle Choir recording, their weekly broadcast, and how that was such a big deal.
Which is funny because it was such a big deal because it was so novel and so different. Novel. But now, every kid has music that they listen to on their phone. And you have access to YouTube, again, on your phone. So anywhere you want, pretty much any song you want. If it doesn't exist on YouTube, it doesn't exist.
So how does that change our job? Does it change our job?
Well, I said this when I was an undergraduate, that I went through 4 years. I was in 3 music classes a day in high school for 4 years. Never once listened to a Mozart symphony.
Yeah.
Not once.
I think we have
But it's because we get really, really focused and we lose
specialization.
Yeah, everything is so about, I've got to get this trumpet piece done, and now I'm going to sing this madrigal piece, and then we're going to go to contest, and now it's the end of the calendar year, and we start all over next year. But we lose the overall understanding. So, like, while we can have kids that are listening to everything, we can give them things to listen to. Because they can go home and hear anything. So we can kind of guide them into, listen to the pop music you like, listen to the radio music you like, but also maybe sometime this week, try this piano piece, and just listen to it.
And I think we get like torn too as teachers, whether because the kids have so much access to music, you know, trying to engage them in our ensembles and our groups with music that they appreciate and that they enjoy and that they like, but also then feeling the need to teach them about the history and the historical aspects and all of those different, just a classical, a Mozart piece or a piano sonata or whatever it is. And that kind of grind of what do we teach, what do we focus on, how do we prioritize those things, and how do we work them all into the 42-minute classes that we have,
Right.
and accomplish everything else that we have to accomplish.
This is where I'd say the specialization or the narrowing to the number of skills. I could potentially, as a clarinetist in a high school, graduate and have very little in terms of a music education, except for being able to play the clarinet part to 20 tunes. And that could potentially happen if I'm really just about putting together performances that, of course, when we say we're going to provide a more broad and rich experience. Hopefully we may play the clarinet part to 20 tunes, but we may understand something to a greater depth. And that's the impetus that leads us to say, let's be careful when we get to specialize in what is the important thing at the end. Is it a music education, or is it the ability to sing the tenor part to 20 tunes? That's a very different kind of approach and has an impact on what I do each and every day. So the appreciation part, how might that be a part of what we do today? We might be helping students become informed consumers. Do they understand what the elements of music are? Do they have any sort of ideas about how to select music to listen to, other than that's what my friends are doing? Can we find moments to help them expand their understanding of music beyond what they're hearing on the radio, or to make meaning out of what they're hearing out in their own place? Yeah, so that ready access, our trickiest job is to try to figure out what to give our attention to at any given period. We're having sudden access, and now I have 10 records, and I'm going to teach I'm going to have people understand the masterworks as if we can put those in a, it's like the recordings when you go to Barnes & Noble, and it's like the 10 best classical pieces of all time. Well, what are those?
And every single one is different.
Yeah. So we just live in a very different world. So we could say, oh, they just have access to everything all the time, but they have access to so many things all the time. Could we use that to our advantage? When we're learning about a piece of music, can we direct them to 8 recordings of the same thing and talk about how they're similar and different, and how do the performers make this work or not work? Do we implement listening every day? Do we plan for improvisation and composition? What can we do? Okay. What other things?
Philosophy questions.
So one of the
Do we want question? They,
sure.
In the review part, it had the early 20th century, the debate on the importance of music literacy and music teaching and learning. Is that, we're confused as to which debate it was. Is that the rote versus notation?
Yeah,
or like,
that's
there's
the
lots
reference.
Roads versus note is what
Yeah.
I thought. I saw that.
I'm trying to look at the same thing you're looking at. Do you have it open right
Yeah.
there? I'm getting up from my spot.
I actually also got it printed out.
Thank you.
Yeah, right there.
Okay, so, well, the debate on the importance would be how important is it? Are there cultures that learn music with no reading of
Japan.
Oh, yeah.
notation whatsoever?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Japan.
How,
There are non-foreign cultures that do it. Like
exactly,
the Beatles couldn't read music.
yeah.
Paul McCartney still says he can't read a note of music, but look at everything he's gotten done.
Drumline. Most bluegrass isn't written down.
So we have many traditions that use different ways of either maintaining or expanding on their literature. So when we're thinking about the debate, that still stays with us now. Most of the time, many of these things are pendulum swings, right? So we could be way over here. Most of us, because when we start to become more informed, tend to be somewhere here in the middle. Is there any figure that you can think of, any person? If you don't get this, that's fine. I'm not trying to read my mind. Is there a person that might have brought to music education the idea that we need to experience music before we learn about its notation?
That
Was
would
that
be
Suzuki?
Suzuki, yeah. Mason did
Suzuki
too,
or
that was
carried through,
Duh.
yeah.
I mean, really, all of them.
How far back do you want to go?
Pestalozzi, the one
Yeah,
who
yeah,
had
yeah.
the
The
whole
thing
idea,
before
thing
the
before
sign, right.
right? And then Mason brought Pestalozzi's ideas over into his book and was advocating rote singing because of the thing before the sign.
Right. So we know that has been that we value experiencing music before we learn to read it. Why do we value the reading of it?
Why do you value the reading?
Mm-hmm.
It can be recorded and saved. If you know
We can pass
how to preserve it, then you can portray it in the way that you like or close to it to another person.
I can still
way down the
perform it.
road.
I mean, I've got an Audacity on my computer, and I could just
Job
record it, and
security
it'll
is
stay.
kind of
No, I'm
the-
just playing. I'm playing for fun. Yeah.
Job security is kind of a critical thing. I mean, like for us, I think when I see people that are like really holding on tight to it, if we don't have to teach them how to read music, then is it going to be easier to pull music out from the schools?
So it's a code.
Yes.
If we get rid of the code, then I'm playing now.
Right.
If we get rid of the code and you don't know how to decipher the code, then you're not going to be able to play with the thing behind the door.
Okay, so I mentioned before that Paul McCartney said he can't read music, and I always thought, well, that's too bad. And then my mom said, why? He seems to have done just fine. And I thought, for a long time, I thought about that, and then my answer came like this. It's just this entire thing about music that he's so good at that he doesn't understand. If he only understood this one other thing, how much better would he have been? There's this
Would he
whole
have been?
part of
Would he
music
have been?
that
Is
he
the
just
question.
doesn't understand. Maybe there's a little thing that could have been unlocked if he had known that as well, but would it have really hurt him?
Then what would have hurt would have been tradition, like you were doing with the orchestra, you know.
Depends on what music. That's why I started
Memorize the
asking
entire-
the question of, are there places where that is just not, it's not an important part. In oral traditions, reading notation is not, it's not an important part. How we view that, do we view that in some sort of hierarchical system? Do we view music, to be the ability to read notation as somehow superior. Do we? And that actually is a part of the debate as well.
Is that? I'm sorry to interject, but I've been wondering about this the past few days.
There's no sorry for interjecting.
I don't remember if this came up in class, but I kept thinking about the court composers or whoever who would work for these people with money, basically, and they were learning how to play their instrument or learning how to read and how it became, like a status thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is that?
Oh, sure.
I guess I was
that's
thinking,
why. That's why I kind of make a little funny
status.
about the code, but not maybe so much, right? But, I mean, that's kind of a hard question. Is it a code?
Yeah, well, I think back to high school and how I had so many other singers with me in high school and in college who still couldn't read music. And the comments that always happen, usually lovingly, in every music department I've ever been in, about the stupid singer who just has to get up and sing. Well, you're not an instrumentalist. You can't read the music.
The musicians and the singers, right? No.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So it's that hierarchy thing that you were talking about. It seems like there's a unspoken divide somehow between instrumentalists and vocalists based on whether or not they can read written music.
So does that bother us?
It bothers a lot of people.
I think it doesn't bother the music profession as much as maybe it should.
I like that answer.
I think,
That's why you go to graduate school, right?
yeah.
It doesn't bother us as much as maybe it should. Because what's the underpinning problem there?
We're locking people out of music. We can't, if we say you have to be able to read music, you need to, I know as much as everybody makes fun of Drumline and the movie, and Dave hates that movie, but just the idea that this kid had to fake it to get on the Drumline because you had to read music in order to be on. If you can't read music, then you can't be on here. And he was obviously by far the best. And I think as stereotypical as that movie was, and I'm not saying it's high class filming, but I think the point behind it of why does this have to be so important? Why would you want to leave out an amazing musician from your ensemble because they can't do that one thing? If reading music had been a requirement for going into a recording studio, no Beatles.
In pop music, though, let's use the Beatles as an example, because there's a secret fifth Beatle.
Yeah.
And he did know how to read music, and he did know how to do all that stuff. And if it hadn't been for their producer, George, a lot of their stuff wouldn't have been done. Mm-hmm. So as a recording artist, what I would say, and this is what I say to my actors for the theater that come to me and don't know how to read music, if you want to be in control, and if you want to be the master of your destiny here, you've got to learn how to read. Because right now I've got a lot of actors that we pay and they come in and I have to play their part and they get their little recording device and they learn their notes and they sing perfectly. They have great voices, but they can't read their pitch off the page. And I've told them, if you want to be in charge of your career from the beginning to the end and be able to do anything you want and be versatile, you're shutting yourself off if you don't know how to read. It's just,
well,
if you don't read, you're narrowing yourself down.
Reproduce it. You not only have to be able to read music, but then you have to be able to play it.
You're putting your fate in somebody else's hands all the time if you don't know how to read. But the flip side is, musicians that only know how to read and don't know how to just play are also narrowing themselves off and cutting off a whole chunk of music. So that's why it's valuable for us as teachers that we need to teach the reading, because this is where you learn the reading. But then they need to go off and be musicians and learn how to just play as well.
Teach the reading and encourage the playing.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Oh, we should make a poster.
You should make a poster. Maybe we should base some ideas on it. So if we understand the value of, hopefully we come to a point where we understand the value and the place of both, without necessarily diminishing diminishing or raising up any particular group of people. That's the part that should bother us. If we, I have choral conducting and lit, but I also have inclusive music ed going on all the time in my head. This whole period of time of value of human worth, and is there something in our message about the value of, we have high art, and we have, are we okay with those terms, and what do they mean about this is a beautiful little segue into philosophy, because we live philosophy all the time, whether or not we know the names Reamer or Eliot or any other philosopher, right? So we live philosophy all the time. We live out our belief systems, our tenets, the things that we value. And so I think there's something a little bit underpinning that is worthy of making us feel a little uncomfortable there in terms of what we consider to be high art. I'm pretty solid on where I stand with that. That art is a contribution from a human being, and it's in the individual how we construct meaning that is important to me. That isn't necessarily the way that we may see someone who has more of a formalist approach that would say it's the music itself. It is the study of the score. We do everything in service to the art. Right? That's a different approach, and I wouldn't say it's better or worse, except for we all have our own preferences. Right? We have our own ideas and belief systems. So that's kind of how we might start a discussion of that. So what of those philosophical views are what makes a difference in our everyday life? So, where do we go from there? So I have one article that I will share with you. It is out of the Australian Journal of Music Education. There are many articles going back and forth trying to compare Eliot and Reamer. I like this one because James Doherty, who actually teaches at University of Kansas, but this was written in 1996, and that's okay. David Eliot has another version of Music Matters that none of us, I'm going to count myself, it's been sitting on my shelf this year. I have not broken it open yet, but we'll do so soon. But we'll see then where we come back and forth. We knew from early editions of the Reamer that there was a responsiveness in the Music Matters to what was in those first editions of Advancing the Vision, that there was a reaction. And then as conversations happen, often when the next person speaks, there's some reaction to that part of the conversation, right? And somewhere it's in this dialogue, in the reaction and in the synthesizing of information that we might start to arrive at some lowercase t truth, or maybe some capital T, or you just take it for what it might mean in your everyday life. So I like this article because it kind of goes back and forth on some major questions, like what is music? And that's why I said when we're talking about notation or sonic properties that make music unique as an art, right? Sonic meaning sound. Properties are what distinguish music from the other arts, right? And Reamer would say that is the fundamental difference, that it's the sonic element that makes us think about and respond to music in a different way than we may with the other arts. So what is music? And so then in this article, it kind of goes back and forth a little bit between Reamer and Eliot. Eliot doesn't have as much to say about the what is music. But Reamer, speaking about music, it's a mode of cognition. It's a way of thinking about something. It's sonic properties that are organized in a way that bring emotional response. It's in creating meaning and emotion, but not necessarily because of all of the properties, but because of something in music that makes us respond in a way that we can't always articulate, and in a different way than we may respond to anything else, which is why I would say it's fundamental to human experience. In that way, I can really get to that. There are responses to music, things that we use music for, we are drawn to music at various points in life, and for various purposes that we can't quite find the same response or experience with something else. And so when we start to go to all of the arguments for music, like it helps us build teamwork, it helps us become better citizens, it helps us in terms of leadership and social skill development, those are all fine and well, but there are a whole bunch of other things that can help us do that, right? A whole bunch of other things. I could be on a softball team, I could play basketball, I could be a part of math Olympics. I could do a whole bunch of other things that help me build teamwork, develop leadership skills, social skills, or other great and lofty things. We appreciate that. What kinds of goals of music are those? Anybody remember? It starts with U.
Universal.
You got the first letter right. How about you? Oh, it could be. Well, is it
They're the things that are
utilitarian? Utilitarian reasons for music. Does that ring a bell? Maybe a little bit. So they are practical, utilitarian kinds of reasons. Are they central to the art itself?
No, because you get the same thing out of dance.
Okay. All right.
And that's another art. You get the same thing out of theater. And again, that's another art. So it's not even just the only art that would offer those things.
Right, exactly.
Because you were mentioning other things
I
which
was.
weren't even art.
I was really in a sports business.
And that's fair, but then to think back, it's not even the only art that would offer those things.
Right.
So there are other arts that do it. So it's just a way of, they're like extra things that you can use to defend music, but it's not central to music specifically.
Yeah. What do we often see in terms of advocacy campaigns and messages of why music? And why is that?
It's easy. It's identifiable to everyone.
Yeah. People get it. You don't have to know music to know those things.
Very good. Music, it doesn't really matter, right? What the substance of the art. If I know that participating in that way, let's say I'm a parent, and by my goodness, I am. You told me, and I am, not very connected to music, and you told me that it's more likely that my child will do better in school, or they will score higher on tests, or that they'll just be a nicer person. I mean, that's good stuff, right? I would like those things. Please sign my child up for the things that will make them a better person and a better teammate and a better leader. And that's attractive. Certainly, a better test taker. And the more that we invest in testing at this time, how much more do we want to use that as some sort of justification? But what's the problem? There are a whole bunch of other things that we could do with our time. It helps us develop our math skills.
Isn't the test-taking thing inaccurate, too?
Yes, right. Yeah. I mean, there's that. Right? There's that, but it's still a popular, it's
correlation versus
if we can
causation.
find anything, right? If we can find anything that might point in that direction, we'll try to skew it in a way that, because it's more readily accessible. When we say things like music is fundamental to the human experience, it's the sonic properties of music that, bring forth a feelingful response that we cannot find in other places. It takes a lot of words, right? And if I really haven't ever experienced that much, or at least I haven't articulated it. It's not going to be it's not as readily accessible.
Into our responsibility for appreciation too, because everybody likes music. Even they'll say, "Oh no, I don't know." Everybody has something. There's something out there, and maybe it was Metallica that the kid's dad was crazy about. And you can say, but what I teach is going to give your kid the same experience, and he's going to come back and go, "Ain't no choir sounds like Metallica."
Yeah.
So we have to broaden what we do to incorporate music of all kinds so that we can defend it by saying, we're here because music is a huge part of life, whether you intend it or not. You can't escape it all day long. So we're here to make sure that you understand a little bit about this thing that's always in your head, no matter where you're walking, at every restaurant,
Yeah.
But if we don't open it up beyond just choir, then we're not really teaching them that.
Sorry, my phone died.
Yeah, well, I could, call her too.
I think
She's
you're
probably.
welcome. Okay. Sorry, it's me.
I have 62%. That's like a lot for this time of the day. That's ready for charging.
So, can I ask a direct question about?
Sure.
Okay, so
I'll do my
they
best to
ask us
provide an
under the-
indirect answer.
Okay, they ask us into the philosophy section to discuss several philosophical bases for including music in the public school curriculum. Is there something specific that they're looking for here?
Well, we just
Or
mentioned a
just-
number of them.
I mean-
Right?
Okay.
So,
right.
what are others? If you were to say what are some reasons why we really need to? And so, okay, let me tell you these questions quickly because I'll send this to you. So, what is music? Why teach music? Why teach music in schools? Which actually is a different question, because we may value that. Oh well, if it's just something that makes our community life richer, then let's just leave it in communities or before or after school, because we have more time then, right? We're not competing for everything else. Let's just do it before or after school.
Why make it a public school thing?
Right.
Why make it a public school thing?
Institutionalized.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Why make it institutionalized? Why does it belong there? Who should teach? Who should learn? That's a big question, actually, and has to do with the special education, but also just are the majority of high school students involved in music in some way? The majority. No.
Not anymore.
Right.
So those are the bases that you're looking for.
So what this article kind of does is go through and give you a little bit of a kind of a summary. Not that you shouldn't be doing what you're doing with that material, but gives you kind of the summary of what did Reamer have to say about that? What did Elliott have to say about that? And in a way to kind of bring those together. Reamer and Elliott are not everything, right? But they have been the two most prominent voices in dialogue, which is philosophizing to explore and recount and counter and consider and go back and forth. I mean, that's that practice, and so they have been most prominent
So you're
in
looking
our
for
profession.
the reasons, is what you're
For
looking
the
for. there.
reasons.
So the philosophical basis you're looking for, you could rephrase it as discuss several reasons for including music.
We
published.
sure could.
Okay, that's
Reason,
okay, I've got it.
reason, yeah. The philosophical dimensions imply a little bit more than reason.
Sure.
Right? That's.
Okay, I was
one of the
thrown off by the
reasons.
philosophical basis. I thought maybe you were looking for like specific philosophers that are considered founding philosophers for certain ideas.
Well,
or,
we get
So,
certain
yeah.
things from all of those people.
I just
right?
needed more direction
Yeah.
on that.
So I would say if we said what is one of the philosophical reasons that Bennett Reamer brought to us, he would say there is something unique in the sonic nature of music, and that it's in our response to that sonic element that we create meaning in a different way than we could without it. So that's a pretty heavy reason. To me, it's one of the most important reasons for music specifically, and that music brings about a human response. Now, we also, how helpful is it for us to be able to talk about our feelings, that we need to have music because it gives students an outlet for and helps them experience and understand their feelings. Is that going to go over really well? I just said the word feelings. It's something that had to do with music.
It should, if anybody's really thinking about it a lot of the stuff that's happening in schools right now with behavior issues or societal issues with school shootings, a lot of that stuff, people keep trying to come back to saying it has a lot to do with the mental health of the students and what they are doing with their emotions and where they're placing them, and if they can talk about them, and if they can even know what to call it, let alone find out how to deal with it, and they don't feel like they have someone safe to go talk to about it. So these things boil up and we're stuck on the left side of our brain in math and reading and standardized tests, and those are all well and good, but
so does that element, does that feel curricular, or does that feel in the periphery? Does that seem curricular in the periphery?
To me, the understanding of emotion is curricular in music for me.
In music, is it in other subjects?
No.
Why is it difficult then to place that kind of rationale in the center of a core curriculum? That's one of the reasons. It's not as easy to, I mean, that is an important human dimension, right? But not as easy to place in the same kind of format or the same structure as we might for other disciplines.
Well, this is why character building things are so popular, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Instead of using the arts, or
Right.
music in particular. Bring the counselor in and talk about what that is.
Right. But maybe if we would educate the public about that dimension of education. Now we can go a little too far with that, and then
Right.
suddenly we're talking about the therapeutic benefits. But the therapeutic benefits are the why we're using music, not our response to music and what happens when we are both performing, listening, composing, and improvising. So I will send that to you, but I think it's to look at, and then the reason for being able to read or notate or listen with understanding is that we're able to understand the elements of music and how in their combination. What are the things that we see on the page? Is the music on the page?
No.
If we're going with the music is a sonic, that it has sonic properties, and that's what makes it unique, then here is your music. The music is not what happens on the page. It's an abstract representation of the sonic thing, right? So we can say that isn't actually the music, but it's a roadmap or a way that we represent music visually so that we can reproduce it, or we can pass it to someone else, or we can do that corporately, and it gives us better access. So that actually the philosophy can come around and answer some of the history and the philosophy. That's why they're together, right? Let's see.
I think the only other thing I wanted to double check before I got
Yeah,
myself on
we're
the
kind of
random
over
tangent.
time
I
here,
know,
but
sorry.
yeah, nope, it's good.
The date reference, the only one they had in there so far that I could find was the 1970 being, or yeah, nobody asked, wasn't it? Being like, why is that date important to music education? Yeah, 1970s.
Is that
significance.
in my guide? Okay.
Yeah, it's on
It's
the other
in
one.
Dr. Richmond's?
Yeah. And the only thing I could think of was Tanglewood, but that was 68 and 69 it started being implemented.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to make sure that I wasn't going crazy and there wasn't something in 1970 that I should be thinking of other than Tanglewood.
Well, I remember
That's when NENC
about ready
left
to
NEA.
stop the... Pardon?
MENC left NEA in the 1970s because NEA became union.
No,
Or
1910.
is that what you said, 1970s?
Yeah, It says, why is 1970 a significant date in the history of American music education? It says philosophy, actually, instead of history.
No,
It's
I
the
think
first publication of...
Is it
There-
special research groups? Is that how it is?
there was something about, I think you're...
when was... Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I know, I think
Pretty
you were
sure.
right about the MENC thing, because NEA went from being an organization to a union.
Right.
And they sort of broke their ties with NEA,
Officially.
MENC, and NEA. PTA split in like
Oh, when they split, not when they chartered, when they split.
Right.
No,
Right.
75.
Yeah.
They became two separate entities.
Having Dr. Richmond for a teacher, though, does that seem like something that he would have put down as on a single line by itself? I'm curious. I'm guessing.
Yeah,
Can you show this
he
to
was
Dr.
a little more
Richmond?
into knowing exact dates. Well, the one he kept emphasizing more and more was Tanglewood, which is why I kept thinking 70s.
What book was first published in 1970? Anyone know?
The School Music Program Description and Standards was 1974.
What was in 1970?
In 1970,
First
Is it
edition,
Ben Reamer's
advanced
Is it Reamer's
edition.
book?
Yeah.
So
why,
maybe that's
why
it.
was that? Why was it such a big deal? Because everyone
nobody
here,
had
you
actually
haven't
written it.
ever read that. We haven't ever organized our thinking in terms of why music is important. And suddenly we now have oh, that is my, I need to remember a chord. Sorry. I thought I'll do that just right after class because I have to get it before I go out of here. That actually is a bigger deal than we think it is. It was when we started to organize, when the profession started to acknowledge and understand that. I remember asking this very question. I didn't put it in here because I didn't emphasize that in class. But the first edition, there was a reason. If you look at the first edition in the preface, it was like a big deal. Here we have an articulated stance on why music should be in schools. It was from an aesthetic viewpoint, but it was a reason. And in that first edition, laid the groundwork for what we know as the 1994 standards, outlined very specifically in that book that these are the things we need to be able to do, that we should do in school. We should sing and play alone with others. We should be able to read. We should be able to compose. We should be able to all of these things. That is. I am quite certain because I just don't think that the other.
Yeah,
it's got to be the advanced
Good.
vision.
See, now I'm glad I asked.
I
There you
have a
go.
list of very simple things to ask you that are really quick.
Okay.
One.
Is this the lightning round?
Well, this may, you might all laugh, but are we supposed to be dressed nicely? Like, are we?
Dress nicely.
Like, I remember Brian Bone showing up in a suit and tie last year, and I'm thinking,
I don't think that's
I might need to go
necessary.
home and get some clothing.
I think, business casual kind
Okay.
of day would be kind of.
What do we need to bring?
Not anything. You'll have 90 minutes in room 109 with your score
Okay.
and a piano and a pencil, and we give you some time to do some analysis. If you've made it through your comprehensive analysis class, you're going to be fine. Analyze some major credential points. Think about what you might teach with the piece. There will also be a one-page direction for you with that score. These are some things we'd like you to think about. You might go beyond that. You have 90 minutes with that, and then after that you come into room 107 and you won't need anything.
Okay.
If you have a copy of your paper, the paper that you put in your portfolio, sometimes there are questions asked about that. That's why they're there. So you might read over that paper. I don't remember. I just remember sticking something in there in my portfolio, but you might glance over
Like
that.
the actual paper that we wrote, like our research paper?
Yes.
Well, whatever it was that was submitted, right?
Right.
Whatever it was that was submitted. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is the video going to be viewed during our time?
No.
That can't.
That's why we're asking you to put that in
Okay.
on Monday so that we can look at it.
So you'll have seen it before we come.
Yes. Absolutely. What other questions? Has this been helpful?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Good.
Well, I think
Okay,
we
I'll
were
send
all
you
worried
those
that
two.
it was like a semester final where we've got to
Yeah, all of those
Very
things.
specific.
Right, you've done that.
Specific
That's the
answers.
purpose of the course,
Right.
right? So we're not going to do that again. It's just like we couldn't sit here in a room and review everything that was covered in
Right.
any one of those. I would hope not, or else, that's,
So
let's
you guys are
talk about
basically
all of these
looking for
things.
us to be able to just make practical applications with the material that we have.
That's what I see as the main goal. And actually, so that you may get some detailed questions. Be able to identify the independent and dependent variable in a
Sure.
title of a research paper. If I'm looking at the if I'm looking at a JRME, can I decide whether this is historical, descriptive, experimental, philosophical? Is it qualitative? Is it quantitative in its paradigm or its approach? Those are some, I mean, how is that? Is that going to make you go home and
We've
look
been
at it?
practicing that.
Good, that's great.
We've been pulling books off the shelf and saying, here's the title. Yeah, that's what we were doing today. Yeah.
There it is. Yeah. That's very good. And likely Dr. Nierman will bring some of those in. There may be a question like, I'm trying to think of a couple questions that I might throw out there. One of my favorites is, identify something that you think has changed. This is usually my first safe question. Identify something in your teaching that you think has changed, in your practice as a teacher that you think has changed since you started your master's degree. Something that you have learned that you think actually makes a difference in your everyday classroom experience for your students or for you in the way that you process things. And anyway, that's one. Or I might, for history and philosophy, say, identify one of these characters for in our list of people who we think about in terms of music education. What did they bring to the why are they still represented in history books, and why does that matter? How is their footprint still felt? So, or someone may ask you a very pointed. Choose a post-1954 music education event, such as Tanglewood, and tell us a little bit about why that was important and what of that carried forward, and that might be a springboard to some other questions. It really occurs, every exam is different, and it's really supposed to be a scholarly discussion where you synthesize the things that you have learned, just the process of doing what you're doing right now, which is why I say, I don't want to get to, you're going to be just fine. And you're going to be just fine. But why, yes, you should get in there and review some things to the depth because of what that does for you. Because of what, not so you can pass the exam. I mean, that's an important part too. But the reason for a comprehensive exam, aside from torture and sheer pain and humiliation, is so that you will synthesize the things that you've learned and say, why does that matter? What does it mean? Am I the same person before and after that degree? I would say that I remember some things that were really very, very different about the way I thought about our profession, both with a couple of those degrees, and to say, man, that really changed in my thinking, or that really helped make me a better teacher, or I really started to look at kids in a different way after this. And I plan fewer of these experiences, and more of these experiences, and I don't put quite as much weight in the rating that I receive at district music contests, or I've started to take that more seriously. I mean, what is it that has, is that the best thing for my kids? And do I know that really that's only one way of looking at how we, what our value as music teachers? So just a couple. Okay? Going to be just fine. Yes. Okay, awesome. You bet.